Hello, and welcome to the video on how to use Draft Manager to run your fantasy draft. To save time, I've already created a draft, including all of the teams. Let's do a quick review of the draft and team screens. The draft entry screen has a place for your league's name, logo, and if the league includes keepers. In our example draft, we will include keepers from last year. The team entry screen has a place for the team's name, logo, and the email address for the team's owner. With our teams set up, we will now set up our draft sheet. On the draft sheet, we will select which positions are required for each team's roster. Draft Manager allows you to include flex positions and defensive players. The next step is to set up our draft order. The first two options are used when you want the entire draft to be random. The remaining three options are used when you set up round 1 based on the results from last year's season. In our example draft, we will select the option 2 reverse of 1, random odd, reverse even. Optionally, we can establish time settings up front of how long each owner has to make a selection starting in certain rounds. At any time during the draft, you can simply select the time field in the lower right to change the time setting. As you can see, we now have a grid of draft picks. We will establish our first round picks based on last year's season by pressing the Setup Round 1 button. Simply tap on the pick you want to change and select the team that has that pick. With our first round now set up, we will create our draft board by pressing the Create Draft Board button. As you can see, the draft board gets filled in based on the draft order we selected. Because this is a keeper league, we will have the ability to set up our keepers by tapping on the pick and selecting the player. After we have our keeper set up, we can now press the Start Draft button to get the draft started. Draft Manager prompts us to decide if we are going to use Game Center to run our draft. We would only use Game Center if another device besides this one would be used to make draft picks. In our example, we will not use Game Center. Now that the draft is started, we can optionally turn on the timer by pressing the Play button in the lower right. To pick a player, you can simply tap on the pick and select the player from the list that appears, or use the player list in the lower right. The player list allows you to filter by position and also to hide players already drafted. If at any point you need to change a player that was selected, you can tap the lock button to unlock the draft board and tap the pick you want to change. Simply select the new player and lock the draft board using the lock button to continue on with the draft. During the draft, you can review a team's draft sheet by opening up the team list and selecting that team. After the draft has ended, you can optionally email out the results to the league members. That concludes our video on how to use Draft Manager to run your fantasy league. Thank you, and please send us any feedback you might have.